A question I got the other day was, how long do we have until we're in SHTF? And the truth is about that is that that question sounds simple, but it isn't. For some people, like SHTF means total grid collapse, empty shelves, banks shut down, civil unrest, and no rule of law. For other people, SHTF means the slow death of normal life. It means censorship tightening. It means trust collapsing. It means endless inflation, endless foreign wars, endless propaganda, endless instability, and a public that can feel something is wrong but can't quite put its finger on it. So when somebody asks me, "Are we in SHTF yet?" my answer is that at a global level, humanity is always in some form of SHTF somewhere. The real question is whether your area, your country, your daily life, and your future are entering a phase where the systems you rely on become less stable, less honest, and less trustworthy. And I think the honest answer is yes. I think for a lot of people, that phase has already begun because SHTF is not always a single dramatic event. Sometimes it's a slow process. Sometimes it's just the boil, not the explosion. Sometimes it's the normalization of dysfunction. People tend to imagine collapse as like a movie, like Mad Max. One day the lights go out, the government disappears, the roads are blocked, and everybody knows instantly that the old world is over. But history usually it doesn't work that way. More often, decline shows up in layers. First, the truth gets blurry, then the institutions get weaker, then the economy gets harder to live in, then political hatred gets hotter, then war becomes constant background noise, like a 1984 scene. Then emergency powers become normal. Then censorship becomes safety. Then dependence gets rewarded while self reliance becomes suspicious. And that's how a society slides. And when you look around right now, what do you see? You see a major U.S. Israeli war with Iran now, sending shockwaves through shipping, energy markets, and business confidence, while attacks on tankers and infrastructure show how quickly a conflict on the other side of the world can hit ordinary people through fuel prices, supply chains, and economic stress. You see the Russia Ukraine war still grinding on in March 2026 with prisoner swaps happening even as negotiations remain deadlocked and the battlefield stays active. That means Europe is still unstable. Resources are still being burned, and a major war on the continent is still not resolved. We see China still applying pressure around Taiwan, while Taiwan is arguing over defense budgets and timelines for arms deliveries. Even when activity appears to dip for a week or two, the broader strategic pressure does not disappear. It just changes forms. Now, we see Turkey involved in the future of Syria, tracking Kurdish militant movements, shaping regional outcomes, and maneuvering in a part of the world that connects Europe, the Middle East, migration flows, terrorism risks, and energy routes. So, no, people are not crazy for feeling like the world is becoming more unstable. The data point is not one single war. It's a pattern, multiple theaters, multiple powers, multiple unresolved conflicts, multiple governments acting like they are preparing for a harsher world. And that matters because one of the biggest mistakes people make is thinking that SHTF has to arrive at the same time for everybody, and it doesn't. For one family, SHTF is a job loss. For another, it's a hurricane. It's a riot in your city. It's a supply chain shock that wipes out medication access. It's a cyber attack that freezes banking for days. For another, it's being politically targeted, censored, deplatformed like I was, or cut off from the system they thought would always be there. This is why I say SHTF is not just one event. It is any point where your dependence on the very fragile systems collides with the failure of those systems. Now let's be even more honest than that. A lot of people asking this question are not really asking for a date. What they're really asking is for emotional certainty. They want somebody to tell them you still have 5 years, or it'll happen this fall, or nothing big is coming. Or some people want it to be now. But nobody honestly can tell you that. No serious person can put a countdown clock on history. What we can do is look at indicators. If you want to know whether we are moving deeper into SHTF conditions, look at institutional trust, debt, look at inflationary pressure, whether your country's leadership acts like it's solving problems or just managing and putting out narratives. Look at whether speech is becoming more controlled. Look at emergency logic. What emergency logic is being used to, justify permanent expansion of powers and crackdowns? Are wars ending or just mutating? Look at whether the average person feels more secure, more prosperous, and more free than they did 5 or 10 years ago. That's what the real dashboard looks like, because a country can look normal on the surface while it's rotting underneath. You can still have drive-throughs, football games, Amazon deliveries, smartphones while the deeper structure rots. This is one of the reasons modern decline is so hard for people to read. People think, well, the stores are open, so things must be fine. No, late stage stability, it a lot of times it looks convenient. I mean, things were still operating in Iraq in the middle of the war while I was there. The machine can keep serving distractions while the foundation is cracking underneath. That's why one of the best ways to answer this question is to separate SHTF into levels. Level 1, as I've talked about, personal SHTF, job loss, divorce, illness, debt, crime, local disasters, tornadoes, things like that. Most people will experience this form first, and that's the most common and most ignored, because everybody fantasizes about global collapse and fails to prepare for a blown transmission or a house fire or a medical bill or a loss of a job. Level 2 is community or regional SHTF. That's a major storm, prolonged blackout, civil unrest, water contamination, supply disruption, sudden crime spikes. And that's where preparedness starts to matter in a visible way. Your food, your water, your security, your network, your comms, your mindset all of a sudden stop being hobbies and they start being real life. Level 3 is national SHTF. That's a widespread internal instability, financial crisis, severe political breakdown, large-scale censorship, institutional paralysis, major terror attacks, escalating infrastructure failures. At this level, millions of people feel the shift. Right? Level 4 is civilizational SHTF. That's a prolonged major war, multi-regional conflict, deep economic fracture across the globe, major currency instability, social atomization, and the collapse of assumptions that held the post-Cold War world together. And my view is that we are clearly not in a total Mad Max collapse. Anybody telling you that is getting a little dramatic, but I do think we are somewhere between the late stages of level 2 and the early stages of level 3 in many parts of the West, while the international system itself is showing signs of level 4 stresses coming on. That's the sober answer. Now, the thing that a lot of people feel but don't know how to say out loud is the Orwellian side of this. Because one of the strangest features of modern life is that we live under the constant atmosphere of managed fear. There's always a crisis, always an enemy, always a reason you need to surrender one more freedom. Trust one more expert, obey one more narrative, tolerate one more censorship policy, fund one more war, accept one more contradiction. The enemy is always at the gate. The emergency is always permanent. The war is always necessary. The truth is always curated. And that's where the 1984 comparison starts to feel less like edgy rhetoric and more like a real warning. Not because we are literally in Orwell's exact world. We're not, but because the pattern is familiar. Endless war abroad, narrative control here in the United States and in other countries, language manipulation, emotional conditioning, public confusion and a population that is kept too distracted, too divided, and too exhausted to resist the bigger trend. And endless war matters here because when a country lives in permanent war mindset, even the locations and the enemies change. The psychology at home changes too. Citizens get used to instability. They get used to secrecy. They get used to contradictions. They get used to hearing that another intervention, another escalation, another package, another emergency measure is necessary. And that does two things. First, it drains the nation, it drains the nation materially through money, equipment, attention, industrial output, political capital. All of it gets consumed up. And then it drains the nation psychologically. People become numb. They stop reacting. They stop asking what victory even means. They stop asking whether the story they're being told still even makes any sense. And that's dangerous because a population that normalizes permanent crisis becomes easier to manage and harder to awaken. And that brings me to something preppers need to understand. Preparedness is not just beans, bullets, and bandages. It's not just gear. It's not just stockpiling. And it's not just tactics. Preparedness begins when with seeing things clearly. If you can't think clearly, you can't prepare correctly. If you think even every headline means the apocalypse is tomorrow, you will burn yourself out. If you think everything is fine because collapse is not total yet, you'll be caught flat-footed. If you confuse fear with awareness, you become unstable. And you confuse comfort with safety, you become vulnerable. The right mindset is neither panic nor denial. It's a disciplined realism. That means you accept that larger systems are becoming less trustworthy. You accept that war abroad can hit you at home through prices, shortages, cyber effects, and political consequences. You accept that censorship and narrative enforcement are real warning signs, even if they're wrapped in, pretty language. You accept that global power is shifting and that transitions between world orders are rarely ever peaceful. And you accept that nobody is coming to save you at the moment things get rough. Now, does that mean that total collapse is right around the corner? Not necessarily. Empires and systems can decay for years, sometimes decades. A failing system can still limp along for a long time, especially one as large, wealthy, and technologically capable as the United States and the broader Western world. People who predict exact dates are usually selling emotion. They're not selling you analysis. But here's the harder truth, and you don't need total collapse for your life to get much harder. You don't need whole systems to fail. You only need the parts that you depend on to fail when you need them the most. That's the lesson. A 3-day outage can wreck an unprepared family. A 2-week supply disruption can expose how fake normal life really is. A banking freeze or a fuel shortage, cyber attack, or unrest locally where you live can do more practical damage to most people than all the dramatic doomsday scenarios they imagine online. So, when are we in SHTF? We're in SHTF the moment normal systems stop protecting normal people. And in some ways, for some people, that's already happening. If your speech can get crushed for crossing the wrong line, that's a form of SHTF for you. If your economy punishes honest work while rewarding manipulation, that's a form of SHTF. If your country drifts from one forever conflict to another with no clean end point, that's a form of SHTF. If trust in government, media, finance, medicine, public institutions keeps collapsing, also a form of SHTF. And if people can feel the instability but are told to ignore it, ignore their own eyes, that's a form of SHTF. So my answer is not that we are in full collapse. My answer is that we are in the early to middle phases of broad destabilization. And the people who wait for an official announcement before preparing are going to be the ones caught behind the curb. This is why preparedness should not be based on a date, it should be based on reality. You prepare because history's unstable, systems fail, governments lie, wars spread, markets swing, infrastructure breaks, and the world doesn't owe you continuity. And most of all, you prepare because being responsible for yourself and people is the duty of a free adult. That's what it really comes down to. So don't obsess over the exact hour or like when the exact hour that the dam breaks. Look at the cracks. Look at the pressure, look at the direction of things. And then you build your life in a way that gives you options in those scenarios. Store food, water, get physically fit, build redundancy, medical skills, get your finances straightened up, reduce your dependence. Know your neighbors, strengthen your family, develop communication plans, pay attention, but don't be consumed and paranoid. Be spiritually grounded, be mentally hard to rattle, and stop waiting for permission to be prepared. Because whether we are 6 months away from a serious domestic crisis, 6 years away from a major system fracture, or we're already living through the opening chapter of a slow burn dystopian era, the answer's still the same. Live like fragile systems are fragile. Live like comfort is temporary, like truth matters, like freedom can be lost. Your people may need you. This is how you prepare for SHTF without becoming hysterical. That's how you stay sober in an age of propaganda. That's how you remain dangerous to chaos and useful to others. So are we in SHTF right now? Not in the full cinematic sense that a lot of people imagine, but in the sense that the old stability is fraying, the world order is shifting, wars are spreading, trust is collapsing, and pressure is building. Yeah, we're in it. Not at the end, not at the hottest point, but very likely in the beginning phases of something darker than what most people still want to admit. And that is exactly why now is the time to get ready. So, as always, stay self-reliant.